I never thought I'd become that person, the one who crosses lines that should never be crossed, trying to justify the unthinkable in the silent darkness of a hotel room. But that night, as I secretly watched my son under the blanket, something shifted inside me, and by the end, nothing would ever be the same. If you're subscribed, I'm starting my story. Night shifts wear you down in ways most people can't comprehend. I'd stumble home at dawn, empty and numb, collapsing as the world woke up. My biological clock was completely thrown off. 7 years in the ICU at Memorial Hospital had utterly drained me. The divorce 3 years ago made everything worse. From a happy family to a single mom overnight, the empty space beside me in bed never got easier. Dating, when would I even have the time or energy? Juggling Mike's school schedule and endless night shifts. I was slowly slipping into isolation back then. My son Mike was drifting away from me too. Adolescence is tough enough already, and lately, he'd started acting out, staying out late, grades slipping. But there was still one thing keeping me from falling into depression. Bowling was the only thing holding my sanity together. Thursday evenings at 7 were the best hour of my week. When I qualified for the state tournament, it felt like people finally noticed me. Jane Palmer, second place. Hearing my name over the loudspeaker sent my heart racing. It might sound silly, but in that moment, I mattered for something beyond caring for others. I was good at something really good, and someone saw it. Things were going well up to that point, and life went on like that for a few months. Then reality slapped me in the face. The tournament was 3 hours away, requiring an overnight stay. Mike's dad was supposed to take him that weekend, but suddenly he said, "I'm not available." Just like that, my chance to shine slipped away. Mike was 16, maybe old enough to stay alone, but after the garage incident, I couldn't take that risk. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, contemplating calling to withdraw from the tournament. Then I looked at my trophies on the shelf, the only things in my apartment that were truly mine. Taking Mike with me seemed like a perfect compromise. He'd like the hotel, maybe the pool. We'd spend the weekend together. The mind works in strange ways. I'd convinced myself bringing him was a responsible choice, a safe one. Looking back, I can see how my loneliness twisted my judgment. My world was confined to work and home, with bowling as my only escape. When that was threatened, I made choices no sane person would. That night in the hotel room, I crossed a boundary I never thought possible, but the truth is, I'd been stepping toward that line for hours. The hotel room created a bubble around us, an alternate reality where normal rules felt suspended. 2 plush, soft beds, generic artwork on the walls, a bathroom we had to share. It all fostered an intimacy we'd never experienced. There were no other rooms to escape to, no doors to close between us. Just a shared space that brought us closer while making everyday boundaries feel less binding. That sudden shift in perception scared me. How could I look at my own son and see something else? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered like a shadow on the edge of my vision. Buying him that game forged an odd connection between us. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I felt a surge of connection. We wandered through stores, laughed about trivial things, and I felt something I hadn't in so long seen, appreciated, connected. Dropping from 2nd to 5th place in the tournament hit harder than I'd expected. After some reflection, I realized how deeply it affected my life. I felt empty, like I'd failed at the one thing I was good at. Lisa's celebration became my escape. Each glass of wine loosened something inside me, dulled the disappointment, made me feel warm and reckless. I didn't stop at 1 or 2. The alcohol clouded my thoughts, but I knew I could never fully escape them. When I returned to the room and found Mike asleep with the TV on, it jolted me. I stood there watching him, the instinct to check on my sleeping child twisting into something unrecognizable. The TV light reflected off my face in the darkness. Each of these moments was a step down a dark road. The unusual intimacy of the shared room, the shift in how I saw him at the mall, the false connection from buying the game, my vulnerability after losing, the wine tearing down my barriers, watching him sleep. Every step made the next one easier. Every crossed boundary made the next seem less significant. I noticed movement under his blanket and froze. In that moment, I split into two people, the mother who should go back to her bed and pretend to sleep, and the other woman, starved for touch, for connection, her hunger growing desperate. I watched his breathing shift. I knew exactly what was happening. "What are you doing?" I asked myself silently. But it wasn't a question anymore. Something horrific was already in motion. My mind started playing games, weaving false narratives. "He's almost an adult," one voice whispered. "You're just there for him," said another. My unmet needs for intimacy, for being wanted, for connection, they all turned toward the one person they never should have. The strangest part was feeling like I was floating above the bed, watching myself. This woman with my face, my hands, my voice. She wasn't really me. She couldn't be. The real me, here right now, would never do this. I put on some classical music and tried to think. "Do you need help?" I said. 4 simple words that changed everything. I remember thinking it sounded innocent, that I could still back out if his answer wasn't what I hoped. When he said yes, something inside me crumbled, not my resolve. That was already gone, but the final wall between who I was and who could do this. His answer should have snapped me back to reality. Instead, it opened a door I'd been unconsciously searching for. "We're just close," I told myself. "This is different." The lies we tell ourselves are always the most convincing. The terrifying thing about moral compromise is it doesn't feel like a free fall. Escaping my routine, the tournament, the hotel, the celebration, had created the perfect conditions for this moment. Away from home, from normal life, everyday rules seemed suspended. I reached out, crossing an irreversible line. Time stretched and compressed at once. My body made decisions before my conscience could catch up. The wine, the loneliness, the intimacy of the shared space, the false connection I'd built. It all converged in that single, devastating choice. Afterward, my body shook, not from pleasure, but from the collision of desire and revulsion within me. The scariest part of crossing forbidden lines isn't the act. It's how your mind starts building hidden pathways back to that moment, even as you swear never again. I couldn't look at Mike or myself. The hotel room, once a separate reality, now felt like it was closing in, its walls bearing witness to something that never should have happened. The digital clock's red numbers blinked accusingly. 03:47. I remember that exact time, frozen in my mind like a photograph. "We should sleep," I whispered, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Mike nodded, turned away, and pulled the blanket tight around himself. That simple gesture, putting distance between us, cut me like a knife. What had I done to my son? The silence between us filled with something toxic. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, my mind overflowed with excuses. It was the wine. It was the loneliness. It was a momentary mistake. Every excuse felt hollow even as I formed it. My brain was working overtime, boxing the event into a separate category that wouldn't touch the real me, the good mother, the responsible person I thought I was. "This can't happen again," I said into the darkness, not even knowing if Mike was awake. But the moment those words left my mouth, another voice inside whispered, "What if it does?" That contradiction terrified me more than anything my conscious mind saying no, while something darker was already imagining the next time. I wondered what was going through Mike's head. Was he confused, traumatized? Did he feel pressured to say yes when I asked, "Do you need help?" Those questions sliced through me, each one a fresh wound. He was 16, still forming his understanding of relationships and intimacy. How much had I damaged his sense of normal, healthy connection? Morning finally came, but I hadn't slept. The light seeping through the curtains felt accusing, illuminating a truth I couldn't escape. We moved around each other like strangers, packing our bags in silence. The drive home stretched into eternity. The radio filled the silence, but nothing could bridge the gap that had opened between us. "Mom," he started once, then stopped. I held my breath, waiting, but he just turned back to the window. That half-finished sentence still haunts me. What was he going to say? What questions, what pain, what confusion was he trying to voice? I told myself we'd talk properly when we got home. We had to address it, but days turned into weeks. We developed a silent agreement to act like it never happened. Even that pretense became another bond between us, the mutual lie we kept up. The line between making a terrible mistake and being defined by it is thinner than most of us realize. A moment of weakness can spiral into a cycle that reshapes our entire identity if we're not careful. I learned that the hard way. When you approach a boundary you know is wrong, remember this. Every small compromise weakens your resistance to the next. The psychological slope gets steeper with each step. That's why stopping before you reach the point of no return is so critical. Recovery isn't simple. It demands absolute honesty with yourself and others, professional therapeutic support, and bravely facing the consequences. Research shows that those who actively engage in therapy and maintain supportive relationships have a better shot at healing. But we have to face a harsh truth. Some wounds once opened leave scars that never fully fade. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more stories. I love you, friends.